For the first 2 weeks following the inauguration, I was in one of the worst places I've been in a really long time. I personally have a hard time accepting that there are so many people who are extremely hateful in this world, but it is the truth. People look for other groups to blame. That's the kind of scapegoating that DJT encourages and does. And the scapegoating that we're largely getting from him right now is immigrants and trans people. In his inauguration speech, he made the declaration that as of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female. I did start sobbing. Not because I feel invalidated by the man, like that's actually impossible. This is him implying I'm going to persecute trans people.
Oh my god, I'm so glad I caught that, guys. I don't want to get sued.
And then, of course, we have the executive order defending women from gender ideology extremism and restoring biological truth to the federal government. Legislation and political statements about gender and specifically trans people are often branded as protecting women and children. So people will support these directives because who doesn't want to protect women and children? Another common tactic that we've seen is let's make it more fair. Let's make sports more fair, which also falls into the protecting women category of the political branding. But we need to be really aware of what's happening under the branding. It's already bad enough as it is, but let's talk about the specifics. In his executive order titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, he sneaks in reference to the Immigration and Nationality Act in Section 4C. If you want to go look at it. And long story short, this could lead to denied visas or permanent exclusion from entering the United States for anyone who seeks to procure a visa by, quote, fraud or willfully misrepresenting a material fact. The material fact in this case being the biologically determined definition of gender that he lays out in his executive order defending women and children from gender ideology extremism, blah, blah, blah. And so, trans people don't get visas. And if somebody determines that their application is misrepresentative, they can be permanently excluded from entering the United States. This isn't just about sports. This is about anybody who seeks to procure a visa. Are you paying attention? I personally am particularly concerned by the use of the phrase gender ideology extremism in his first executive order about the gender shit. If they start arresting people, you will hear that they are arresting extremists. And it will surprise you. You didn't know that there were so many gender ideology extremists, so many radicals, and there aren't. These potential arrests, if that comes to fruition, will simply be trans people and allies and educators like myself. That is something I want all of you to be extremely aware of. Radicalism and extremism are often associated with people who are willing to commit violent acts to further their cause. So these terms, radical, extremist, will elicit that connotation when you hear them. That is branding. You will be alarmed when you hear that somebody is a radical. When we hear words like that being used, it is super, super important to think critically about who is using that term, who is it being used against, and how is it being wielded. And it's really, really clear that this administration plans to brand anyone who doesn't comply with this idea of like biological determinism when it comes to gender. Anyone who doesn't agree with that is going to be branded as like a radical. That is what is indicated by the language that he has been using. One of the reasons that trans and non-binary people are being scapegoated is that trans and non-binary people's existence directly opposes the grounds on which fascism is built. This is one of the reasons why fascists are so obsessed with us. In order for the government to define and enforce how men are allowed to act and how women are allowed to act, and this applies to everyone, there cannot be another category of personhood, not something uncontrollable. There cannot be anything that challenges the state definition of what man or woman means, which is why one of the first things that DJT did was to delineate state definitions of gender based on, quote, biological truth, which, by the way, completely ignores the biological truth that intersex people exist.
So technically, these aren't definitions of gender he's set forth. Doesn't delineate them as definitions of gender. Go over the executive order if you want to see how he defines gender ideology and gender identity associated with that definition of gender ideology. But in stating that the gendered words women, girls, boys, men must be associated with female and male biological sexes, that's clearly tying those gendered words to the biological sexes. And so I see that definitely as an attempt to define gender, because we do have societal conceptualizations associated with those words. It's a bit complicated, something I could be caught on with like, well, technically this is what they're actually doing.
Now, biological sex is a label put on a certain set of reproductive organs, chromosomes, and hormones in the body. That's the basic rundown. Sometimes I get comments on Instagram that are like, what are your chromosomes though? I haven't had a chromosomal test. Have you had one? A lot of people do not find out that they're intersex until like pretty late, I'm gonna be honest. And there are a lot of people out there who probably don't know that they are intersex. The policies that affect trans and non-binary people affect intersex people really significantly as well. The male-female gender binary is a Western conceptualization of gender based on biological sex that was spread and implemented through colonization.
Okay, wait. It's not only a Western conceptualization of gender, okay? Other groups across the world have had sort of a binary gender situation before, but we've also had groups across the world who have not adhered to a distinct two-gender binary. So when I'm speaking in this portion, I'd like to correct myself. I'm not saying this applies to every situation across the entire world. It applies to many situations. For example, colonization in the Americas of indigenous groups that have not adhered to a strict two-gender binary. We gotta take this out of the universalism. Okay, apply it to more specific. I was a little too broad. I was a little too broad-handed with my claim there. Whoa. The West didn't do it to everybody. Okay. But it did do it to people. Colonialism was real.
Other cultures may have had similar conceptualizations of gender and gender roles, but it cannot be stressed enough that the system of gender as we know it today, the gender binary, is and was another tool in the oppression of groups all over the world. And yes, I'm saying oppression here because when you enforce gender roles, you're saying, oh, you woman, you're only allowed to, you make the babies, you don't do other shit. That's oppression. And historically, that has been enforced on populations that have been colonized. Gender is made up of a whole list of things, not just the identity of how you feel on the inside, okay, but behaviors, language, social cues, gender expression. There is so much to it, and to how gender is perceived socially. Our perception of gender also exists hand in hand with white supremacy. What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to be a white Christian woman? What is the right way to act according to that definition of womanhood? These are socially, racially, and religiously determined rules. But there are actually many definitions of womanhood all over the world. What it means to act, walk, talk like a woman. Now, I want to give you an example of something. A group of white women in the United States, for example, might enact misogynoir, which is the intersection of misogyny and racism against a black woman, either in an overt or a covert way that makes this black woman feel othered based on both gender expectations and race or ethnicity. Perhaps they point out ethnic features that might appear masculine or androgynous. This is something that happens quite often with white womanhood as the blueprint of what looks the most feminine. That's white supremacy in practice casually. You're saying you look more masculine, you look more androgynous. What determines who looks the most feminine? Most. Anyone who says, no, it's just your angular face that makes you look more androgynous or masculine, you're missing the point so completely. Why do you perceive an angular jaw as like more masculine? And how will DJT's policies on trans people directly impact cisgender women who are perceived in this way? Which women are at risk of being categorized as gender divergent, despite the fact that they are and always have been biologically and otherwise women? These are just some of the many, many things to think about deeply and critically under this administration. These policies don't just affect trans people, they affect everyone. Now, people who cannot grasp gender as a complex topic will revert to the elementary definition of gender, the biologically determined definition of gender, because it is more comfortable and familiar, because not knowing everything makes them look stupid and nobody wants to look stupid. But that's not really the reason, because weaponizing biologically determined definitions of gender is a powerful tool in oppression. It's not about protecting women, it's about controlling them. And so DJT attempts to redefine gender falsely. I posted an Instagram story about his inauguration speech, and I received so many messages, a lot of them saying like, no one else gets to define who you are. And that is the truth. It's quite obvious, which is why all of this is so fucking ridiculous. In the executive order defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth in the federal government, he talks about how the infinite plethora of non-binary identities does not provide a meaningful system for government identification, which is something that a lot of people are going to agree with. Yes, and the biologically determined definitions of gender set forth in the order purportedly to make government identification easier, which honestly I don't understand why it needs to be so easy for them, because they're clearly so versed in convoluted bullshit. These definitions are elementary level. They're just like, oh, you have penis, you have vagina. Boy, girl. And they seek to change the markers on trans men and trans women's passports, which puts them at direct risk. Because, especially for people who have transitioned already, the gender marker on their passport doesn't reflect what somebody's seeing in person. It will effectively out them and put them at risk of violence, or it will put them at the risk of their passport's validity being challenged. The people who don't see that as a problem, or in fact see that as justice, lack basic empathy, point blank period. Why the fuck do you care? On the government travel advisory website, the T has been removed from the LGBT.
Also went through like 2 rounds of revisions on this where they removed the T. They still had reference to the gender X marker for passports, and then they fully removed that. So there's nothing about the X marker on passports on this page anymore.
The State Department, which is in charge of issuing passports and passport cards, is part of the executive branch of government. Hunter Schafer, who has had her gender marker on her passport be an F since she was a teenager, received a renewed passport with an M on it.
On my new passport, my gender markers were first changed in my teens when I first got my driver's license, and then passports following all have been female since then. Hasn't really been a problem. No part of the process was different. I filled everything out just like I normally would. I put female, and when it was picked up today and I opened it up, they had changed the marker to male.
This is a key example. And a lot of people might criticize queer and trans celebrities for not speaking up sooner. Honestly, yeah, I get it. But can we take a moment to realize how important it is right now that it is the role more than ever of allies to speak up? Because trans people are at direct risk of that we are being persecuted. Sorry, my SD card kind of filled up. Trans people in the United States are being persecuted. We are at direct risk of genocide. It is really important as allies to speak up, because when trans people, when non-binary, when we stand alone, it is so much easier for the targets to be placed. Yes, amplifying trans voices is super important, but adding your own to the mix is also really important. There are going to be some people who might agree with me, who might disagree with me. That is my opinion. I don't feel safe in America. And it's not just trans people. It's not just my friends that I worry for. It's not just my trans brother who I worry for. It is women as well. Pretty much every woman I know is really fucking worried and going through it. And I'm not really afraid because of other people in this country. I don't live in MAGA territory, so I'm very lucky for that. I don't have that kind of impending threat of violence from other Americans who are hateful, right? But I am afraid of the kind of enforcement that comes with authoritarianism. I have a well-documented history of queer activist work. It did not start here. But right now, a lot of the work I do is as an educator, and fascists target educators. So yes, I'm aware of what my future could look like. Some people say, stay safe, Iris. I wish, but I can't, because I have a duty and I do not want to comply in advance. I am so sick of hoping that an ally is going to speak up for me and that it's going to like reach who it needs to. That's not going to happen. It's my job. I'm the one who has to do this among the other trans and non-binary people, right? And if the executive branch continues to consolidate power, that puts me at risk. It puts a lot of people at risk. People exercising their free speech rights. But there are also other trans people in the United States who are at higher risk than me, who have already been impacted by these policies. It doesn't begin or end with me and my personal selfish fears. And I'm in a relatively safe position right now. There are some people who are already at risk, who it's not safe for them to speak out. I was in an Uber a couple days ago with my friends at like 3 a.m. We were talking to the Uber driver, who was saying that he noticed that a lot of immigrants who normally would be out and about on the weekends, late at night, have not been out in the city because they are afraid. The change is palpable and observable. ICE was at my train station. We do see the effects of fascism here, and it is hard to ignore. And I don't want to ignore it because I care. And it's easy to go numb. One of the only ways that I was able to recover from this intense dread I was feeling was to check out of the news for a little bit and just like live my own little life. And my personal life is pretty good right now. Thriving under these circumstances is an act of protest. That doesn't mean I'm forgetting what's happening around me, right? In the moments when I remember the danger that I am in, when I let that come to the front of my mind because it lives under everything, I still feel the dread in the happy moments. I feel the dread waking up in the middle of the night. When I think about the situation, I lose my breath. My future and the future of so many people I care about is being gripped so tightly that it is hard to breathe, and it is hard to hope, but I must, and so I am. The US is huge and has a crazy bureaucracy that wants to keep its power. The judicial branch wants to keep its power. DJT has already lost in the Supreme Court, and private companies want to keep their power. He's pissing off a lot of people internationally and domestically. Boycotts are effective. Not to mention, none of us can afford to buy shit anyway, essential items or otherwise. So So it's pretty fucking easy to boycott. The companies that do not realize that will fuck around and find out. We live in precedented times. Everyone says these are unprecedented. These are precedented times. We know that. The way to shift the outcome is to throw a couple wrenches in the machine. They lay out the rules so that they know what to expect. You're not allowed to defend yourself against a police officer, but you have the power to read between the lines and act accordingly. They're playing a game with their cards face up on the table and expecting to win because they've always been winners. Right? If you are feeling the impacts of this in the US, I feel for you. I'm there with you, right? If all you can do is breathe in opposition, okay? I love you all. I would never leave you. I have a prescription for you, and that's to go dance with your friends or dance in your room to some music you like. You are loved. You're valid. I don't even need to say that. We all know that, right? I will see you in the next one.